My family ordered me to play background violin at my sister's wedding, dressed in a mismatched gray gown tucked by the amplifiers, not the stage, to fade into silence. But I defied them, playing the truths they buried, and when my father's voice exposed their lies through the speakers, their faces turned. You'll never forget it. The envelope came on a Monday night return address, just white cardstock with a silver border, and my mailbox number written in unsteady pen stroke. For a moment, I thought it was some leftover junk mail or a community flyer sent by mistake. Then I opened it. Inside was a wedding invitation. Livia's wedding. My sister, or more accurately, Nora's daughter. It read, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Livia Tate and Declan Morse. We would love for you to be part of this special day as our violin guest." Tentative. No name, just that label. Violin guest. Tentative. I stared at it so long the corners started to curl from the heat of my fingers. There wasn't even a formal greeting, no, "Dear Amara," no, "We hope you'll come." Just an assumption that I'd show up, play something soft, stay quiet, and leave. My thumb brushed over the embossed ink like it could reveal something kinder beneath. It didn't. I folded the card twice slowly, then pressed it flat again and placed it inside the drawer under my notebooks. The light in my office was warm that afternoon. It was autumn in Charleston, and the maples were blooming again, like they hadn't watched me grow bitter over years of being invisible. I had a workshop to lead at the youth center. Later, one of my regular students, Mia, 10, glasses, bright green sneakers, was waiting when I arrived. As I tuned the old Steinway, she bounced on the stool and said, "Miss Tate, I saw your sister in Elegance magazine at the pharmacy. She's so pretty." I smiled. "The kind that doesn't touch your eyes." "She's getting married soon," I said, adjusting the music stand. "Big wedding." Mia tilted her head. "Will you be in it?" I didn't answer, that familiar itch behind the ribs when someone says your sister's name like it's dipped in gold, and yours like it's an afterthought, if at all. Livia always belonged to the spotlight. Even as kids, she was the one with matching bracelets and violin recitals that ended in standing ovations. I was the quiet one in the corner, clapping too hard, too long, just to feel part of it. After class, I sat in my car a while before heading home. The dashboard clock glowed 6:15 p.m., but I didn't start the engine. I just watched the kids spill out of the center, laughing, backpacks swinging, full of that careless energy I used to think would last forever. My phone rang. Nora. "Hi, Mom." I answered, already bracing. "Oh, good," she said. "I was hoping to catch you. We're finalizing things for the wedding." I waited. She continued. "Livia wants it tasteful, elegant, no distractions, so we were thinking maybe you could play something light, background music. Nothing dramatic, of course." I could hear the clink of her fork against a plate, like I was just another item on her checklist, somewhere between catering orders and lighting setup. "It's not really about the music," she added. "It's about her day, so just something simple, familiar." My hand tightened around the phone. I could feel the corded muscles in my forearm twitch, but my voice came out soft. "Sure, whatever you need." "Great," she chirped. "Oh, and one more thing. Don't worry about dressing up too much. It's more intimate than formal." When I hung up, I sat at my desk for a while, just sat there, my hand still wrapped around the phone like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to this ridiculous performance we all kept pretending was a family. Later that evening, I opened my email to look for rehearsal details. Nora had forwarded the guest list. I scrolled past names I didn't recognize. Board director, Dr. Ellis Marrow, cousin June, maybe. Then I found it. Amara Tate, violin girl, try not to overdress. I closed the laptop slowly. On my shelf, tucked inside a faded green folder from years ago, was an old recital program. I hadn't opened it in years. It was from my junior performance, before everything changed. There it was, in looping script. Amara Tate, soloist. I traced the letters with my finger. Then I folded the program and slid it into the same drawer as the wedding invitation. Side by side, one said who I was, the other who they thought I was now. She thought agreeing to play was the peace offering. She didn't realize it was the opening act of her humiliation. The package arrived late Tuesday morning. No note, no brand tag, just a plain gray box with my address and Nora's name as the sender. I carried it inside and set it on the small desk, the one I used for grading papers and organizing schedules, and lately, emotional damage. I cut the tape and pulled back the flaps. Inside was a gown folded in a clear plastic garment bag. Gray, not ivory, not rose, not pearl. Gray, the kind of color people painted storage rooms and forgot existed. It had a frayed hem and a neckline that dipped oddly off-center, like it had been altered once and then given up on. It smelled faintly like mothballs. I walked it to the bedroom and held it up in front of the mirror. It didn't fit the group photo Livia had texted the bridesmaids earlier that week. 6 women standing in a soft lavender gradient, each dress tailored to their bodies, hair pinned and shining under warm light. Mine didn't belong in the photo. I grabbed my phone and texted Nora, "Hey, is this the right dress? Mine looks different than the others. Nora, it's neutral. You'll be at the violin anyway. Nobody's going to look at you." I stared at those words longer than I should have. Not because they surprised me, but because of how easy it still was to be stunned by her. As if I kept hoping against everything I knew that maybe one day she'd write back with, "Oops, that was a mistake. You deserve better." I packed the dress into my travel garment bag and reminded myself to breathe. I had a rehearsal dinner to get to by late afternoon. I was walking through the doors of the Crestview Manor where the welcome dinner was being held. The main dining hall smelled of thyme and fresh-cut lilies. Guests were already filtering in. Friends of the groom, relatives from out of town, some with name tags, others just mingling with polite wine grins. I spotted my name folded in a tiny card, all the way at the end of a long banquet table. My chair was right next to the door leading into the service pantry. A waiter offered me sparkling water with a quick glance and the kind of nod they give to staff, not guests. A few minutes later, Livia breezed in, glowing in soft chiffon and flawless makeup. Her hair swept into effortless curls. She spotted me and walked over with the kind of air kiss that leaves no warmth. "Oh, good. You made it," she said. "I told the planner you'd be here for the music stuff so they didn't have to adjust seating. You're good with something classical, right?" "Simple." Her tone was light, like she was discussing tablecloths. I nodded once, too tightly. "Of course," I said. "Simple's my specialty." Before I could sit, Declan approached. He extended a hand with a salesman's smile. "You must be Amara," he said. "Livy told us you were the family violinist." The groom's mother, a tall woman in a navy shawl dress, leaned in with interest. "That's sweet," she said, patting my arm. "It's so important to have hired help you can trust at a big event like this." "Hired help?" I opened my mouth, but Nora had already joined the circle. She laughed politely, brushing the comment off like it didn't sting. "Amara's been playing violin since she was a little girl. She's always been reliable." Reliable. Not talented, not accomplished, just dependable, the way you talk about someone who waters your plants when you're away. I held my breath and smiled. We sat and I picked at the edges of my plate while the rest of the room clinked glasses and laughed like old friends. Occasionally, someone would glance my way, maybe to confirm I hadn't wandered off, but no one asked me anything beyond what I planned to play and whether I'd be wearing something more formal tomorrow. When it was over, I thanked the servers, stepped outside, and walked to my car under the soft glare of streetlights. My shoes clicked against the asphalt lot in that lonely way that makes you realize how small your presence really is. Back at the rental house, I changed out of the gray dress and laid it flat across the spare bed. The fabric caught the overhead light, dull and lifeless. It looked more like a tablecloth than a dress. I stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection didn't flinch, but I did. Something in my chest twisted. Not sharp, just deep, like a bruise that was never allowed to fade. Inside were my pieces. Vivaldi, Bach, Brahms, music that used to make me feel like I was more than background. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the first page. I wasn't here to take up space, but I wasn't here to disappear either. I told myself it didn't matter. I was here for peace, for family, for them. But the sun had barely climbed past the oak trees when I realized I'd made a mistake. The wedding ceremony was set outdoors beneath cream drapery and low-hanging fairy lights that were already flickering softly in the early evening haze. Garden chairs faced a makeshift altar framed with ivy vines. Somewhere behind me, A quartet of servers lined up iced tea pitchers and repositioned the dessert table under a shaded awning. I'd arrived early, Nora's orders. She'd wanted me to test the mic, make sure your little violin works with the setup, as if I'd dragged the Stradivarius here myself. The staff had positioned the violin stand awkwardly off to the side, tucked between the amplifier stack and a catering tent that smelled of grilled salmon and sage. It wasn't near the stage, nor was it angled toward the audience. It was tucked in like a piece of decor someone didn't know where to place. I ran a hand over the strings and adjusted the chair, already feeling the sweat settle between my shoulder blades. I was wearing the gray dress again. This time I hadn't bothered to smooth out the creases. Nora's voice rang out behind me, already mic'd up. "Let's run a quick check, shall we? Just a few notes." I nodded and played a soft arpeggio. The speakers caught it late, echoing the sound like it didn't quite belong in the space. I tried again, slower, and Nora turned toward the crowd, lifting her hand to shield her eyes from the sun. "Perfect," she said. Then she turned back to the gathering guests and smiled into the mic. "Everyone, welcome. What a beautiful evening for a celebration. Before we begin, a quick note. Today's ceremony is accompanied by a special touch. Our talented little helper will be providing background music throughout. She's always been so good at staying in the background." There was light laughter. A few people clapped, unsure if they were supposed to. I didn't flinch, but I felt the twitch in my hand on the bow. Just a flutter, like my body trying to betray me. I forced a small smile and focused on the strings in front of me. "Keep your head down," I told myself. "It's only music. You've done this 100 times. I waited. The real signal hadn't come yet. Nora walked off the platform, and a few bridesmaids passed by, adjusting their hair, taking selfies, complimenting each other's earrings. One glanced over at me and said, "Cute dress," in the way someone might say, "Nice hat," when it's raining. Then Livia approached, floating down the aisle like the evening belonged to her alone. She looked breathtaking, of course, her gown sculpted to her figure like liquid satin. She had always known how to catch the light. She leaned in close, lips almost brushing my ear. Her perfume smelled like jasmine and superiority. "Play this, won't you?" she whispered, sliding a folded sheet of music onto the stand. "I wrote it just for today. It's called Vow of an Endless Night, just like you used to play when we were little." I blinked down at the handwritten notes. It was basic, predictable chord progressions, a melody that tiptoed instead of soaring. It wasn't just amateur, it was childish, and she wanted me to play it in front of all these people. The past tugged at me like a thread unraveling. I was 16 again, sitting under hot stage lights at a state competition, my fingers dancing through Bach's concerto in D minor. Roar sat in the 4th row, hands tugging in my mum. Livia had been near the back, wearing a polka dot dress and an impatient scowl. Afterward, she hadn't clapped. That same night she cried in the car. I remember the whimper. "You always make it about you." Nora had turned around and snapped, "Could you just stop stealing every moment from your sister?" That was the moment something cracked. The violin had once felt like breath and fire in my bones. After that night, it felt like guilt, like vanity, like something I should hide. I looked at the sheet again, simple and soft. Of course, so I stay forgettable. The guests began to shift. The procession was about to start. I adjusted the music on the stand. My fingers hovered over the strings, and I played. The melody tiptoed across the garden like a child unsure of its place. It said nothing. It filled space, it echoed softly, then vanished before anyone could remember it was there. The applause from the ceremony still echoed faintly across the lawn when I slipped away from the noise. I didn't go far. Just beyond the flickering fairy lights, through the narrow gravel path that curved behind the reception tent, the oaks thinned out, and I found myself standing before the azalea bushes near the fence line. And that's where she was, Grandma Esther, half sunk into a navy wicker chair, her shawl draped loosely over her shoulders. She was humming softly, the way she always did when her hands weren't busy. I hadn't realized how much I missed that sound until I heard it again in the dusk. She turned her head before I spoke, like she'd already known I was coming. "There you are," she said. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, but it still carried the same warmth that had soothed me through every scraped elbow and disappointment. "You looked lovely out there, even if they tried to hide you." I sat down on the small bench across from her. The silence between us felt like a blanket, familiar, safe. She reached for my hand. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed something into my palm, a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges. "Your father meant to give you this," she whispered. "They never sent it." I looked down. No return address. Just my name in his old handwriting. The seal was already broken. I opened it slowly, like it might shatter in the air. Inside was a letter from Curtis Institute, a full scholarship summer intensive, then fall admission, dated 12 years ago. I forgot how to breathe. I read it again, slower this time, my eyes catching the line about exceptional promise and rare control of tone. I remembered that audition. Remembered coming home, my fingers aching from the Vivaldi cadenza, my chest still heaving from nerves. That night, Nora had walked into my room and said, they weren't interested. Too many better candidates this year. And just like that, I'd believed her. Grandma didn't speak. She just watched me, her eyes damp but steady. I knew then she'd known. Maybe not everything, but enough. The rest of the puzzle fit too easily. A week later, Nora had stood beside Livia at that ribbon cutting for the Young Artists Network, a music nonprofit Livia founded with backing from the same foundation that partnered with Curtis. I remembered the article in the local paper. I remembered how Nora kept calling Livia visionary. I remembered shrinking. My dream had never failed me. It had been buried. I sat there, hunched forward, the letter still in my lap. My fingers had curled slightly, but I hadn't realized until I noticed the faint crease I'd made in the paper. I smoothed it gently, then folded it again, this time on my terms. A breeze rustled the trees behind us. From the main lawn, laughter floated out, with the faint clink of silverware. Rands rested by my ear. "You weren't weak," she said. "They just made sure you felt small enough to forget how strong you were." I nodded, but didn't speak. I wasn't sure I could. Yet, later, when I returned to the reception hall, my heels clicked too loud against the tile floor. The lights inside had dimmed from the slideshow. Everyone faced the projector screen, half lit in flickers of color and childhood nostalgia. The title card read, "Our Journey, Livia and Family." The first slide showed Livia at 5 in a sundress. The next, blowing out candles on her 7th birthday. Then came a recital. Livia holding a tiny flute, then posing with a youth orchestra. There were park photos, Christmas dinners, a blurry video clip of Nora adjusting Livia's scarf at a high school awards night. I waited. The loop continued. There were no pictures of me, not even in the background. No birthday parties, no music awards, not even the group shot at the beach house, where I knew for a fact I'd been the one behind the camera. The audience clapped politely at the end. Nora stood and lifted a wine glass glowing under the amber lights. "To my beautiful daughter," she said, "every moment with you has been a joy to relive." I didn't lift my glass. I didn't even blink. My eyes stayed fixed on the blank screen, now white again, like someone had wiped it clean, like a whiteboard that never had my name on it to begin with. They hadn't just rewritten the story. They had made sure I didn't exist in it. They didn't cause a scene. I didn't walk out. But inside something shifted. A weight I'd carried for years, the need to be quiet to not ruin the piece, started to slide off, inch by inch. This time, it wasn't going to crush me. The air was still crisp when I arrived at the venue, the kind of heavy quiet that only happens early in the morning before weddings. I walked through the parking lot, clutching my folder of sheet music and adjusting the hem of that gray dress, still a little too long on one side. Still not quite mine. I approached the main doors with the printed confirmation in hand, expecting a nod and a welcome. Instead, I was stopped. A venue coordinator, tablet in one hand, earpiece clipped to her ear, held up her palm. "Hi, vendors are checking in around the back," she said without looking up. "I'm not with catering," I said. "I'm the bride's sister." She blinked, pausing for the first time. "Oh," she said, scrolling through her tablet. "Sorry, you weren't listed in the family section. We had you with music services." I stood still, hearing the words echo in the lobby's glass wall. She waved someone over with a strained smile. "It's fine, just let her through." I was led around the side entrance anyway, through the service hallway, past a woman carrying folded tablecloths, a teenager unboxing plastic wine glasses. When I emerged into the prep area of the ballroom, I had the strange sense I had never left backstage. Later, I made my way into the adjoining dining room for the family welcome brunch. Nora had organized a small formal affair, her version of coastal charm, which meant assigned seating and embroidered napkins. The tables were set in a wide horseshoe shape. I found my name not next to Livia, not between any aunts, not even in the cluster labeled family. Just one small card at the edge, set slightly askew. Miss Amara Tate, violin accompanist. I stood there longer than I should have. A staff member breezed by, adjusted a floral arrangement, glanced at me like I was in her way. I sat down quietly. From across the room, I watched the rest of them filter in. One aunt in a matching coral cardigan. Another bridesmaid giggled over cocktails. Then came Nora, gliding in with the familiarity of someone completely in control of the scene. Livia entered last, of course, hair swept into a glossy bun, skin glowing under the soft chandelier light. When she stepped into the room, people actually clapped. Nora walked to her, kissed her cheek. Then she turned to me with a practiced smile. "Try not to play too loud during the vows," she said under her breath, adjusting the strap of Livia's dress. "It's Livia's moment. We don't want to strap." Instead, I stood and excused myself, said something vague about needing to tune the violin. No one really noticed. Out in the hallway, I leaned against the cool granite wall and pulled my phone from my purse. I opened my draft folder. There it was, just as I'd left it. Subject, Resegment Youth Music Program. I had written the draft weeks ago, assuming that after this wedding, after keeping my head down one last time, I'd be free. I'd walk away from teaching, from music, from the last tether that kept me hoping for something that never came. But now, I wasn't so sure. I stared at the blinking cursor. My finger hovered over discard, then hovered over send. Then I locked the screen. I reached into my bag for tissues. Instead, my fingers closed around something firmer, thicker. The Curtis letter. I had placed it there before leaving the rental house, folded carefully beside my lip balm and tuner. I slid it out. My thumb ran over the crease I'd made last night. Full academic award. Room and board. 5 words that had once meant everything, then meant nothing, and now meant something different altogether. I could have gone. I should have gone. But I didn't. And the thing is, it wasn't because I wasn't ready. It was because someone made that choice for me and called it love. A few deep breaths, steady but tight, then I folded the letter and slipped it back in. When I returned to the dining room, the plates were mostly cleared. People laughed. Someone had started a toast. Livia beamed. I walked back to my seat without a word, but before sitting, I unlatched the leather folder of sheet music I'd carried all morning. Tucked behind the requested selections was my own copy, handwritten, edited, bolded notes, swells I had mapped with pen years ago. I switched it out. No one saw, no one asked. But they would hear. By the time guests began to settle into their cream folding chairs beneath the oak canopy, the air had turned thick with anticipation and humidity. I stood alone near the violin stand, half in shadow, half in glare from the low sun filtering through the draped silk canopy above. My dress, still gray, still quietly offensive, blended perfectly into the background fabric, as if I'd been meant to disappear. I could hear the distant chatter of relatives and friends, waiters moving trays of iced tea, and beyond the sheer curtain at the garden's edge, Livia's voice, laughing, delicate, practiced. I glanced down at the strings and rested my bow above them. My fingers hovered, not touching, just breathing there. It had told me exactly what to play. Vow of an Endless Night. A piece that wasn't written for music, but for optics. Light, frothy, forgettable, just the right soundtrack to make the bride look radiant without drawing attention anywhere else. But as the first note approached, I didn't reach for Livy's sheet music. Instead, I reached for my own, tucked between the pages like it had always been there. I placed the sheet gently onto the stand. Then I began. The first note came slow, heavier than I'd intended, almost unsure. But then the second found it, and the third reached deeper. It was a melody I hadn't played aloud in 12 years. I'd written it during those lost evenings in middle school when the world felt like too much and yet nowhere near enough. I played it to soothe myself when the rejection letters came in, not knowing they'd never been sent. The chords were dark, then rising, minor turns that flirted with hope. There was no bright resolution, just a truth I'd carried in secret for too long. The guests shifted in their chairs. A few whispered. Someone coughed, but no one interrupted, and I didn't stop. A hush settled like a soft veil over the crowd. Even the servers had paused at the tent's edge. Then, halfway through the piece, just as I lifted into the bridge, the speakers crackled. A man's voice filled the garden, not a stranger's, my father's. To my daughter, Amara, the one who taught herself to fly even when we clipped her wings. A collective intake of breath spread across the lawn. Several heads turned, including the officiants. The voice continued, slow and worn with emotion. I recorded this the day Curtis called. I wish I could have protected that dream longer. I wish I'd fought harder. I froze, pouts suspended above the strings. The last time I heard that voice was at his memorial. The recording played on. Not long, but long enough to slice open every room I'd been locked out of. Enough to say what no one else had dared. Gasps turned to silence. Livia, framed perfectly at the start of the aisle, clutching her bouquet like it might break, stood motionless beneath the ivy arch. Nora didn't blink. She sat stone still, eyes narrowed toward the speaker as if she could will it off with just her rage. I closed my eyes and let the final notes fall gently from my bow. They didn't land in applause. They landed in silence. For a second, no one moved. I looked up. Not even the wind dared. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I felt undeniable. The final chord still lingered in the air, sustained between the branches of the oak trees and the silence that swallowed the courtyard whole. No one moved. No one dared. Livia remained frozen beneath the ivy archway. Nora hadn't spoken, but her eyes darted like she was searching for a script, one that had somehow slipped from her hand. Then came the sound of a chair gently creaking. It was Elias Holt, who had once been my instructor years ago, when I still believed talent could rise above politics. Now, older, grayer, but no less sharp in presence, he stood from the third row and stepped forward with the deliberate grace only a man used to commanding a stage could possess. In his hand was a folded paper. I wasn't sure if this would ever leave my briefcase, he began, voice calm but steady. 12 years ago, I signed this letter on Curtis Institute's letterhead, a full scholarship for Amara Tate. Gasps rippled across the crowd like wind cutting through grass. He raised the page, facing the guests like an instructor raising his baton. Her attendance blocked. I didn't breathe. My fingers curled beneath the edge of the violin stand. Nora's complexion paled. She gripped the edge of her seat as if she could steady reality by anchoring herself physically. Her lips parted, then pressed shut again. Nothing came out. But Livia stepped forward, shaking her head with forced lightness. That letter. It was never mailed. You don't have proof she could have handled that kind of pressure, that kind of institution. Elias turned to her, expression unreadable. It wasn't mailed, because someone in her family requested the foundation redirect the funds. That I do have in writing. A murmur erupted. Not confusion this time, but realization. A few guests turned toward Nora, some toward Livia. A couple stood from their seats entirely, edging closer like they needed to see it for themselves. I didn't move. I didn't need to. A small voice, barely audible, cut through the growing buzz. She taught me. Everyone turned. It was Zoe, 11, in sneakers and a polka dot dress, one of my violin students from the youth center. She stepped forward, twisting a crumpled napkin between her fingers. She taught me what it means to believe in your sound, even when no one else hears it. Her voice cracked, and she blinked hard. I used to whisper in everything, even when I played. She told me that silence doesn't make you safe. It just makes you easier to ignore. Her last words came out as a whisper, but they struck louder than any mic'd speech that day. Zoe looked toward me, eyes glassy but proud. Then she turned and walked back to her seat. There was no applause, no music, just shifting silence. A man from the groom's side, his uncle, I later learned, said just loud enough for others to hear, "She's the only reason I didn't leave after the first speech." Another woman near him nodded. Same. I still hadn't stood. My hands rested neatly on my lap. My gaze remained steady. Nora looked like she might speak, might shout, but no one handed her a microphone. For once, there was no sudden favor, no rescue moment where she could reclaim control. Livia. She reached for the mic stand behind the ivy pedestal, but her hand met nothing. The microphone was gone. Someone had taken it before she got there. I didn't smile, not because I didn't feel something rise within me, but because it wasn't joy. It was something else, something quieter, older. The sound of a truth finally being heard. Livia's fingers hovered in the air, awkward and twitching. The microphone had vanished like someone had quietly decided she'd spoken enough for one lifetime. Let's not get lost in theatrics, she began, her tone pitched higher than usual, as if volume could substitute for credibility. This day, this ceremony, was meant to be a celebration of love, of unity, not personal grievances or exaggerated performances. Her gaze swept the courtyard like a performer gauging a reluctant audience. I understand emotions are running high, she said, hand dramatically resting on her chest. But I think we can all agree that forged letters and staged confessions don't belong at a wedding. She paused, expecting some polite agreement. There was none. Still, she pressed forward. I have documentation here that confirms Amara's application was rejected. I didn't want to share this, but given what's happened, she turned, gesturing to a woman in a charcoal blazer who handed her a printed paper from a slim folder. She held it up like proof in a courtroom. Curtis said no, so while I'm sure the story was heartfelt, it wasn't real. And I'm sorry, but we can't keep letting a violin player hijack an entire wedding. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. But I felt every stare shift between us like a ripple across a pond. For a moment the crowd was still, uncertain her tone, weighing her confidence. Tenor recognized the trick. She was trying to rewrite the narrative quickly while the emotions were still raw. Nora gave her a slight, steady nod from her seat, the kind of support that says, keep going. They might still believe you. And for one split second, I saw it working. The man and I suddenly said, from the side aisle, I don't care who said what. The man said, standing tall in a navy blazer. I want to hear her play again. A murmur ran through the guests. Someone clapped, another followed, then a third, and none of it was for Livia. She tried to speak again, but her words were buried under a tide of rising applause. The spotlight, once fixed squarely on the aisle, now turned almost hesitantly back toward the violin stand. I stood, the gray fabric of my dress brushing past my calves, and walked toward the chair. There was no speech, no declaration. I simply sat. Someone had placed my music folder on the stand, but inside, I slid in a different page, one I had handwritten years ago, a piece I never finished until last night. The melody began low, a single line, then another joined it, and then came the thread that stitched them together, the lullaby my grandmother used to hum. The chords didn't cry, they confessed. And as the music climbed, winding through every omission, every unspoken insult, every moment I was told to sit down and smile, I felt my chest open. Not with grief, with clarity. People leaned forward. Some stood down of the corner of my eye. I saw a staff member approach the front. In his hand, crumpled but intact, was the original wedding invitation. Someone had scribbled over it in red pen. 4 words, small but sure. The one they buried, but someone else had crossed that out too, and beneath it in bolder strokes, the one they should have celebrated. I kept playing. I didn't look up. Not even when I heard someone crying in the 4th row, not even when Livia turned her back to the crowd, and not even when Livia slowly, silently rose from her seat and slipped out the side garden gate. The piece ended not in triumph, but in stillness, like a river after a storm. No cue was needed. The applause roared, sudden and full, not rushed, not polite. It echoed across the courtyard, across the trees, across 12 years of silence, and it did not stop. Entries passing across the stone walkway and half-fill wineglasses sat forgotten. The jazz trio packed up quietly, but the applause's echo lingered. On the venue's patio, I sat with Grandma Esther, 2 untouched coffees between us, hers dark, mine light. She folded the Curtis letter carefully, saying, "The world didn't get it wrong, darling. They just got there late. Nora passed below, heels sharp, gaze distant, never looking up. I didn't look down. Livia stood alone by an oak, bouquet limp, waiting for me to offer an exit. I didn't. She blinked first. Ladder. A donor's hushed words. Misleading representation, ethical concern, board review. Targeted Livia's nonprofit. Nora's name faded quickly. The venue's website updated. Feature performance, Amara Tate. Original composition, no longer background accompaniment. I breathed. A staff member handed me the crumpled invitation, now scrawled with "Thank you for saving the room" over violin girl. Tentative? Weeks later, I pinned it above my old recital program. Amara Tate, soloist, and left it unfolded. On Wednesday, my new student, 14, shy but defiant, said, "They say I'm too quiet to matter." I saw myself in her. "Then play something they can't ignore," I said. I didn't need the spotlight. I just needed to be heard. And this time, I was.